This is as close as you can get to nuclear power in Australia, in one of our most famous national parks, just a few steps from the car park.
Australia doesn't yet have a nuclear power station, but it's soon to get one at Jervis Bay in New South Wales.
I'm sitting on the foundations of the Australian nuclear reactor that never was. 40 years ago, this was going to be a British-designed steam-generating heavy water reactor. A steel-lined concrete dome would have soared more than 20 metres above my head. Designed to make plutonium for Australian bombs, with electricity as a byproduct, the Jervis Bay reactor was cancelled in 1971. 40 years later, with 440 nuclear reactors in 30 countries generating 14% of the world's electricity, what are the practicalities of making our own?
The answer is no, we couldn't do it ourselves.
One reason is that our universities haven't taught nuclear engineering since the 1980s. Retired engineer Glenn Green built nuclear power stations in South Africa and France. But to build one here, he says we'd need to import the reactors.
You have to be able to handle big chunks of machinery that weigh between 200 and 300 tonnes. And there are not very many harbours in Australia that can handle that.
Okay, let's say we can unload a flat pack style of nuclear reactor. Now, where do we plug it in?
The bigger you build them, the cheaper they are per unit of electricity generated. So there's this urge to go bigger and bigger and bigger, and the upper size limit tends to be set by the total capacity of the grid.
Too big, and they risk collapsing the grid. If they're built near industrial centres, the East Coast grid should be able to handle the modern reactor size of about 1,500 megawatts. Nuclear power stations that use steam to drive turbines need two basic materials: uranium to keep them hot, and water to cool them down. That's why they're often located on the coast, as our first reactor would have been. 8 tonnes of water would be sucked out of Jervis Bay and pumped around the reactor core to keep it cool. That's 8 tonnes every second, which works out to nearly 1/10 of Jervis Bay's entire volume in a year. It's the same situation today. The standard reactor studied by the Australian government in 2006 uses up to 80% more water than other power stations.
We've engineered and designed a solution.
But we still haven't solved the old problem of where to safely store the radioactive waste.
If anybody asked me to guarantee anything I designed and built for 100,000 or more years, the answer would be come again. In other words, if one looks at it that sense as an engineer, no, nobody's ever done it.
As energy demand grows, our future power supply needs a diversity of technologies that reduce pollution and that we can operate ourselves. This 420 megawatt combined cycle gas-fired power station is one of only 3 in the Southern Hemisphere.
It produces about 25% more power and 65% less greenhouse gas CO2 per unit of electricity than the coal-fired power station it replaced.
It took 3 years to build this gas turbine. If we ever agreed to build a nuclear reactor in our own backyard, how long would that take?
The only answer that I can safely stand by is, say, twice as long as it would take in Europe or North America. We're looking at somewhere in excess of a decade. What bothers me is that if we're going to develop an Australian nuclear industry, we've got to do it from the ground up ourselves.
Because compared with other technologies we do have expertise in, that would be an expensive and slow way to tackle greenhouse pollution. So in the end, what are the prospects for a homegrown nuclear industry in Australia? Well, as far as I can tell, our future is already behind us.